chill, says The Times, which features snow falling on rescue workers. It's a nation pushed to the limit, says The Eye. The Independent reports that despair in Japan is turning into anger. The nuclear catastrophe means energy bills in the UK will rise. That's in the Express. And The Star says a British teacher who helped save 42 children following the earthquake in Japan is a hero to be recognised and welcomed. So let's talk through some of those with Luke and with David. And Luke, to you first of all, looking at The Eye.
Yes, The Eye with its headline, "A Nation Pushed to the Limit." I think before now it's been about how well Japan has been coping in the press, but now, as we're starting to see more, we're starting to see some of the cracks appearing, and there's criticism from both inside and outside Japan, how they're handling it, whether they're being entirely open and honest with us. And the story inside about how riot police are now having to be dragged into the nuclear power plant out of fears that it could get even worse. I think we've been told it was going to be contained, and yet it still has been ever more explosions, and it seems to be something that seems to be getting ever deeper.
When it comes to this, David, I mean, I guess the problem is, we were talking about this an hour ago, that when it comes to the Japanese government, the nuclear authorities there being open and honest about what's going on, the problem is it's been developing and changing so rapidly. I guess it's very hard to do, isn't it?
I think what's particularly interesting today and in tomorrow morning's coverage in the media is the intervention of Emperor Akihito. And I mean, throughout history there have been some key moments when the Emperor of Japan has intervened, and here he suddenly appears on television, and as the Indie reports, to put Japan's sacred figurehead on television shows illustrate how deeply worried the government there has become. And basically he's appeared to seek to reassure the Japanese people. For me, I don't know if Luke agrees with this, the outstanding thing that's come through to me over the past few days has been the astonishing dignity of people in the most horrendous conditions.
We saw in Holly Williams' report earlier on, I mean, one of the refugee camps set up in a sports hall where it was immaculate and everyone behaving with absolute dignity.
Absolutely, and we're so used, and I'm sure journalists look for it as well, we're so used whenever natural disasters happen to seeing looting and rioting and all sorts of problems, and the people of Japan have really shown everyone how it's done and really how to act with dignity under very difficult circumstances.
Let's look at the worst case scenario then, and sincerely hope it doesn't get to this, David. The Telegraph saying 48 hours possibly to some sort of Chernobyl-style disaster.
It is a chilling headline, and you know, over the past few days, the ebbs and flows of this situation. It's not as bad as we feared. Oh, perhaps it's a bit worse. And then tonight, you've been reporting that radiation levels may not be as bad as they were only a few hours ago. If we don't quite know what to believe, goodness knows what the people of Japan are thinking at this time. I also find it interesting, on the front page of the Telegraph, we've got a piece from Andrew Gilligan, who sat on this settee quite a few times. Reviewing the papers. What's it really like inside that Fukushima power plant? They work sweating in airtight suits, fighting disaster in a plant collapsing at their feet.
I mean, and he's talking, I mean, the people called the Fukushima 50, isn't he? And I guess, Luke, there has to be, and as time goes on, I mean, the stories do emerge about more personal things that are going on. These 50 or so people working in close quarters with the reactors at Fukushima, who are undoubtedly putting their lives very much on the line here.
Well, absolutely, especially as it seems there's an awful lot that's still unknown about what the problem is. There seems to be conflict, as I think there was on Sky earlier, with outsiders, how they view the problem, and the people inside Japan. We'll probably only hear their stories in days or even weeks to come, and to see just how brave they've been. But yeah, it's a sort of very small slice of the personal and the human in an enormously violent and graphic disaster.
Yeah, I was looking at that's one of the reactors at Fukushima 1, and down to, we think, a hydrogen explosion, which could be down to some of the water being pumped in, some of that seawater being pumped in as part of the cooling system. So difficult to
But
know.
is it really, you talked about the Fukushima 50, is it really this tiny number of people who, as Andrew Gilligan says, stand now between Japan and the world's worst nuclear accident?
Well, but a lot. It's down to basics, isn't it? It's down to these, the basics of getting coolant, or water essentially, and boron into these cooling chambers and reactors. I mean, and that's a manual job, isn't it? At the end of the day,
it's not very reassuring though when you see these helicopters hovering overhead and chucking a bit of water over the top.
And riot police with water cannons. It seems all quite basic for something that seems so technical.
Oh, this is the issue, isn't it? And which is why, I guess, I don't know if we're touching on it, but certainly when we ran through the front pages saying that, I think it was the FT saying China's reviewing its status with some of its nuclear power plants as well as a result of this. And I guess a lot of nations will look at this whole area again. There's, David, as you're talking about some of the water drops taking place, the amount of water something like that carries, it's an awful lot for helping fighting a fire. When you're talking about cooling uranium rods, it's not a great deal, and it proved to be ineffective today.
Well, that's the sort of thing you expect in a forest fire, maybe, but in a nuclear disaster.
That's what we're talking about, decay heat with all of these reactors, and we can only hope that is going to decay reasonably rapidly.
It's quite interesting as well. On a number of the front pages, you've got international criticism. You've got American experts and EU experts who suddenly are questioning, are the Japanese on the ground really up to it? Which is a pretty harsh thing to be saying at a time like this, but
it also comes down, we saw in New Orleans with the dreadful oil spill, is whether one company on its own can deal with it, or does it need outside help, or does it need government help? There's often a conflict because people want to try and contain it on their own terms.
Let's move to the aid effort in all of this. We know there's been a problem with some 12 aid workers trying to get through. The Mirror's take on this, Luke, is that the Foreign Secretary couldn't run a bar.
Yes, 12 aid workers turn up to try and help where they can in the relief effort in Japan, and are, I was going to say promptly turned away, but they had a couple of days kicking their heels at the airport in Japan. At the weekend, William Hague was sort of forced to come out and say he's not quitting. He's on the ball. He's very committed to the job. However, the criticism doesn't stop, and it's a time when he's going to be spinning more plates than any foreign secretary has for a number of years, and he's going to really be coming under very, very close scrutiny.
I mean, is there a problem with this, David? As a journalist, you know that with these sort of things, once people smell blood, that they go for it. I mean, this was down to Foreign Office officials. This wasn't down to the Foreign Secretary.
Well, the problem is when you're in those sort of jobs, it happened on your watch, is the cliche that's always rolled out. And I think that William Hague is taking a bit of a bashing at a time when, frankly, he doesn't quite know where to turn. He would be inhuman if he wasn't under huge pressure at the moment with all these issues coming up at the same time.
And the Mail's take on Luke, I mean, perhaps slightly more, slightly less personally. I mean, talking about red tape.
But it's still, it's still full of very angry letters, disgusted UK rescue workers, talking about kicking their heels in Tokyo airport. It really is blame the embassy, and as Mr. Davis said, ultimately, the buck stops with the top dog, and it's not like he's just come into the job. He's been there long enough, and I don't think he can argue it's before me that yes, I think he really has to take responsibility.
The remarkable thing at this time is that we have so many major international stories going on, major international incidents, and some of the others have been pushed down somewhat as a result of this ongoing situation in Japan. The Times, on page 3, David, is looking once again at Libya, and some comments from President Obama.
Well, we are entering, obviously, a key phase now in this crisis in Libya. Where's the leadership is effectively what this full page 3 of the Times is asking, and what are the rebels thinking?